We delve a bit more into Graham Ward's experience as a casework manager now, and particularly the role of a disclosure officer. Whilst he seems to accept he has the responsibilities that would be accorded to a disclosure officer, he doesn't seem to want to accept that he had the title of disclosure officer, but then it's not really clear who was disclosure officer if it wasn't indeed him as a casework manager. Let's jump into the inquiry.
How many cases of yours, when you were an investigation analyst and an investigation manager, went to prosecution?
I would say 3 or 4.
That seems quite low, considering we know that the number of prosecuted subpostmasters stretches into at least the mid-700s. And the fact that at one point he says he was covering England and Wales, even if he wasn't directly involved, he must have been aware of them. But 3 or 4 seems like a really low number, whatever region you were covering, unless it was extremely remote, large but not very populous.
And is that, so that's between 1995 and 2001?
Yeah. Yeah, because I was first officer from about 2004. Sorry, I've got my times mixed up, haven't I?
Yeah, you became policy and standards manager.
Yeah, in 2004, sorry.
2001,
yeah, I
you
joined
told us earlier.
I joined in 95 as an analyst.
Yeah.
From 97 to 2001, I was an investigation manager.
Yeah.
And in that time, I can think of 3 that I can remember. There may have been 1 or 2 more, but certainly no more than 5, I would have thought.
And I'm sure they will be memorable to the subpostmasters who the prosecutions were brought against.
Who acted as the disclosure officer if you did not?
Well, I would have been the disclosure officer as such. So it's my responsibility, but I didn't see myself as a disclosure officer. I know it's my responsibility to disclose everything, but I saw myself as the investigating officer.
Well, even if nobody conferred such a title on you of disclosure officer, it was your responsibility and nobody else was the disclosure officer, then you are it.
I appreciate it's a kind of a dual role, but yeah, I wouldn't have seen myself as singularly a disclosure officer. But yes, I knew it was my responsibility.
Your responsibility to do what?
To disclose everything that was relevant to the case, and if it supported the defence or undermined the prosecution, then it needed to be disclosed.
When you became the assistant and then the casework manager, was it the casework manager's responsibility to ensure that all reasonable lines of inquiry had been exhausted?
No, not that I can recall, no.
You told us earlier that those working in casework might point out anything obvious, like a missing witness statement or a missing exhibit.
Yeah.
Does that describe the extent of casework management's oversight of the quality or the substance of an investigation?
Yeah, as I say, from memory, the team leader would be the one who would have more oversight of the case and the conduct of the case.
Did files have to go through a team leader before they were submitted to casework?
I think so, yeah.
And do you know what function the team leader performed, what checks the team leader performed?
No, I don't know.
Surely he should be aware of these, because wasn't one of his former roles as an investigation manager? I mean, are we talking 2 different roles here? I mean, the investigation manager and the team leaders seem to overlap. So surely he would be aware of that, because immediately prior to this role, that was his role. And before that, he was an auditor.
When you were an assistant casework manager and a casework manager, who made the decision whether or not a person was to be prosecuted or not?
That would be the lawyer within the criminal law team. The criminal law team would advise on the charges. The decision to prosecute would be down to whoever was the prosecuting authority, which was generally the head of the security team or investigation team, whatever it was at the time.
So who would make the decision to prosecute?
The decision to prosecute, from my recollection, would be whoever the prosecuting authority was at the time. So it could be the head of security. It changed. The prosecuting authority would change in my time in the team.
Surely the decision to prosecute would ultimately lie with the Crown Prosecution Service or, the other appropriate body in the devolved regions. Maybe, though, there he's suggesting whose decision on the post office side would it be to submit a file for prosecution, and ultimately it would be the security manager, presumably on recommendations from the investigation managers and casework managers.
Did you get to see all the advices that the criminal law team prepared?
They would, the criminal law team would put an advice in the case papers that would come back to the casework team.
So the whole file would come back to you physically with advice added?
Yes, that's correct,
In your witness statement, no need to look at it, it's paragraph 16, you say the case file would be submitted to the by the casework team to the criminal law team, who would prepare an advice and detail any charges based on the evidence. Is that right, that before the file came back to you, they would outline the charges that they suggested be pursued?
Yeah. Or they would come back with an advice for further inquiries to be made and not necessarily make a decision. So
I wonder how many times that happened where it was sent back for further investigation, considering the tight timescales and literally the hundreds of people that were prosecuted.
Did that happen?
Yeah, that would happen quite frequently, yeah.
And so we're not making a decision now, further investigatory work needs to be undertaken?
Yes, absolutely. That would happen quite frequently, yeah.
And would you then pass the file back down the chain or along the line to the investigation manager?
Yes.
You carry on in your witness statement, the head of investigations or whoever was the prosecution authority at the time would have sight of the case file and would make the final decision on whether to prosecute or not. Do you know what test or approach the head of head of investigations took when deciding whether to prosecute or not?
No, I don't know.
In casework, did you know what standard had to be achieved before a decision positively to prosecute was made?
No.
That's surely a massive oversight, because otherwise you literally don't know whether what you're handing over to the criminal law team is fit for purpose. Those standards surely are a core part and expectation of the casework manager role. Otherwise, no wonder he remembers cases being sent back frequently. That would seem like a glaringly obvious outcome if you're not even aware of the quality and standard required by the criminal law team within your own organisation.
Were you aware of the code for Crown prosecutors?
I've heard of it, but I wouldn't know the details of it. That would be, from my perspective, that would be a decision for the criminal law team or the lawyer in the criminal law team.
Was that a document with which you and the team were familiar at the time, the code for Crown prosecutors?
I wasn't familiar with it, no.
Was any filter applied by the casework team by reference to evidential sufficiency? We're not going to put a case up to the criminal law team and the head of investigations if on our review of the file there's not sufficient evidence.
No, there wasn't, no.
And that would seem like something they could have done, because in all the roles he's identified where there's major workload issues, casework management, he didn't seem to suggest there were a lot of issues, and the duties didn't really seem to entail anything too onerous. So presumably that is something they could have put in place.
So were you literally post-boxing it?
Essentially, yeah.
And as we said earlier, the compliance didn't address that, evidential sufficiency. The compliance checks didn't address evidential sufficiency.
No.
Thank you.